Church growth is about more than church attendance. Only when a church is properly resourced financially, properly resourced spiritually, and properly resourced in leadership can church growth happen and lives transformed. We do not always think of our financial investments as part of ministry and discipleship. Welcome to the Unconventional Ministry Podcast, where the conversation is about fresh ministry ideas and innovative approaches. I'm Dennis Weens, your host, Senior Impact Catalyst at SAT7 USA. If you visit SAT7 USA, that's SAT7USA.org, you can check out different ways of planned gifts, which are powerful ways to give and reach more people with God's love. Check out the tab Planned Gifts or the tab Get Involved as ways to learn ways that you can be more involved. My guest today is Dirk Scates, and he's with CDF Capital, and he's Vice President for Ministry Development. You know, Dirk, CDF Capital sounds like an investment firm, but you're really about discipleship and ministry and church growth. So I'm glad you're joining the Unconventional Ministry Podcast to help explain what sounds like two different things. So welcome.
Dennis, thank you for the invitation to be a part of your podcast, and so glad that I can share a little bit of the story of CDF Capital and what our ministry and our mission is in helping churches grow. That's been our mission from day one for 70 years. Since 1953, we have had one mission, and that is we help churches grow.
And you've been a pastor for many years, and now you work for CDF Capital. So let's start, from your journey as a pastor. Why this change to what sounds like an investment firm?
That's a great question, and one that some people have asked. And so, I served three different churches for 10 years each, so 30 years of a local pastorate ministry in Phoenix area, in the Houston area, and then most recently in the Kansas City area where I live today. And, someone asked me when I left the last church that I was at, why are you leaving ministry? And I responded, I'm not leaving ministry. I'm just going to the marketplace. And so I like to say it this way. I traded one congregation for about 125 congregations that I work with their senior leadership, church leadership in Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Missouri, and sometimes also Iowa and Nebraska and Minnesota.
A lot of times we don't put church ministry and biblical stewardship in the same conversation, but we need to encourage people to really bring those two conversations together.
Absolutely. And I think that, biblical stewardship is absolutely the right word. It is biblical, and it is the stewardship of the resources that God has given us. And as an extension fund, and that's what ministries like CDF Capital are, then we extend the kingdom by providing the pieces of capital that you have mentioned. And as you said, church growth is so much more than just tracking attendance. It really is about discipling spiritually maturing believers and creating a culture of healthy leadership and exercising sound financial principles in stewardship. And so by helping churches in all three areas, in leadership capital, in spiritual capital, and in financial capital, then we think when a church is properly resourced, that leads to transformation. And so we call that piece transformational capital, but it's made up of those three components.
Very good. I know we met a few months ago, and it was the dedication of a church relocation, and I'd spoken at their capital campaign launch a couple years ago, and people got excited, and they were pledging, and money was coming in, but the church was delayed in their relocation. So the church had reached out to you at CDF Capital to help manage that transition. Maybe just explain a little bit how you come alongside the church in that situation.
Sure. That was an interesting case where they found us through a Google search. And in a conversation with the leadership at that church, found out that they were seeking a lender and they also had some cash reserves that they were looking to a place to park for a period of time while they anticipated this upcoming renovation of a large box space that they were relocating to. And so, as it turned out, we didn't end up doing the loan. They have a great relationship with their local bank, and the local bank had a favorable interest rate, and so they went with their local bank. However, in the process, we built a relationship with them. They found out that our business model is so much more than a lender, and we like to say that we are so much more than a lender at CDF Capital. And so they were able to invest at CDF Capital, and we have a very simple business model. We have 10,000 investors that are both individuals and churches. They have invested $650 million in total assets with us. And out of that pool of money, then we're able to resource churches with church loans. As those churches pay back their loans, then we're able to give a nice return to our investors. And so this particular church in Omaha took advantage of that and placed their cash reserves with us. They got a favorable return, generally better than commercial lenders can offer. And so that was how that relationship started, and we continue to partner with them all the way through the renovation process, even though we weren't doing the loan, with the understanding that we come alongside churches as partners to become a trusted financial partner of church leaders and investors by resourcing the capital Big C church as it fulfills the Great Commission is really our vision. And so we were able to do that with this church in Omaha.
I know on your website, CDF Capital, you refer to transformational capital, which isn't just the financial, but you also focus very much on leadership, and you focus very much on the spiritual capital as well. So these three are very intertwined as you help mature churches, especially in their capital campaigns and their growth models.
Absolutely. We like to say and start with spiritual capital because everything rises and falls on the spiritual health of a congregation if it's supposed to grow. And we know that God designed the church to grow. So spiritual capital at CDF looks like prayer and connecting, collaboration, putting best practices forward with the partner churches that we're working with. Leadership capital looks like gatherings and resources. We curate a rather massive library of content that have to do with leadership practices, financial and stewardship help for churches, and then ultimately financial capital, which looks like investments and lending. So when those three pieces of capital are brought to bear in a church, then transformation happens. And we believe that every person is on a spiritual journey. And we believe that the best place for that to happen is in the local church. So we've come alongside local churches, and we're considered a parachurch ministry. We're a nonprofit ministry, which seems odd for a lending and investment ministry, but we are. And so at the end of the year, when all the operational expenses are paid, that pool of money just goes back into the pool that is lent to churches to help them resource purchasing land, building buildings, renovating space. And that's primarily what we do.
As I listen to you talk, it seems to me that this would be an easy conversation to have with the local church leadership, but I imagine that it's not always an easy conversation. What are some of the obstacles you face in working with local leadership in the church?
Well, in my territory with over 125 churches, churches range in size from 50 to over 8,000. And so oftentimes the biggest challenge for me personally is just getting past the gatekeepers to talk with the decision-making person who's in leadership, or the person that is influential in leading their team, especially in these three areas of spiritual capital, leadership capital, and financial capital. And so that's always a bit of a challenge. But once I think there's a natural reluctance to a sales approach, and
Right.
And so we come at it from a completely different way. And that is we come at it from a relational way that at its core is about the spiritual development and growth of a congregation. And when church leaders find out what we're truly about, because quite honestly, if we don't if we don't land a loan, or if we don't get an investment, that doesn't mean that relationship ends with that church leader, because we have so much more to offer. And it really is about linking up with other church leaders, and we view ourselves as a catalyst that helps that connection happen.
I know the title, CDF Capital, it sounds like you're coming to the church to sell them a product, but I encourage the pastors that are listening to look beyond the title and look what the resources are that they can, CDF Capital can come alongside your church and help. And that leads us to maybe talk about some of the resources that you have, and where can they find some of these resources?
Absolutely. I think some of the specific resources that I would mention for church leaders that are looking for leadership development, looking for some spiritual growth. We don't sell curriculum, but we are strategic partners with Exponential and Leadership Network. And so Exponential, as a leading church planting organization, and works hand in hand with CDF Capital to resource not only church planters, but church leaders in general. And so that is a strategic partnership that we highly value. I would also mention our relationship with Leadership Capital, and that looks a lot like learning communities that they are offering. We help provide invitations to those and spread the word that here's some opportunities for your senior leadership. And it might be a learning community for communicating pastors. It might be a leadership community or learning community for worship pastors. They are specific to the role that they offer these, and these are offered throughout the year. In addition to that, we sponsor our own Executive Pastors Conference, which is called XPS. And you can look at our website at cdfcapital.org, and you can find out more information specifically about the conference that will be happening in May in Dallas, Texas this year. There'll be over 200 executive pastors and other staff members that will attend that, with an outstanding curriculum and speaker list that you'll certainly want to be a part of. And then I would say that if your church is looking for some type of financial capital, whether it be a loan or you have some cash reserves that you would like to park for a period of time, then we would love to have a conversation with you about that. We like to talk about a win-win-win. The church wins, or the individual wins that invest with us, because they get a nice return on their investment. CDF wins because it allows us to resource that many more churches, and ultimately the kingdom wins when churches grow.
Oh, very good. And again, cdfcapital.org is the website. A lot of resources there for churches. Is there a difference between a small church of 50 people or a church of 8,000? There's resources, but the principles are applicable regardless of how many people are attending the church, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's very true. There may be some dynamics and some logistics that differ, but ultimately they have the same mission. And Jesus has called us to go into all the world and to make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so really our vision is that we come alongside as a trusted partner to church leaders and to our investors, and we resource the church to fulfill that Great Commission from Matthew 28.
I'd encourage you listening today to this podcast to forward this podcast on to your church leadership and have them listen and look at some of these resources. It might just be what they've been looking for, just like the church in Omaha had to do a Google search. If you forward this, that will save them the time and effort to do Google searches And reach out to Dirk here. Just get on the website. He's here in the Midwest, and you can start the conversation with him, and he can direct you to the regional representative. I suppose you got representatives all over the country and even internationally. You're listening in Canada, they probably have some help up there as well. So I encourage you to share this podcast with your executive leadership there at your church or your ministry leadership as well. And then again, talk a little bit about that conference in Dallas in May.
Yeah, this is an annual conference that we do. Last year we were in the Boston area, actually in Manchester, and outstanding speakers like Ed Stetzer, Dan Ryland from 12 Stones in Atlanta has been one of our featured speakers. And this year it's going to be at Compass Christian Church in Colleyville, Texas. And again, this is specifically a conference that is run by executive pastors and for executive pastors. And so I'd highly encourage the senior leadership of your church to consider sending your executive pastor. If your church isn't large enough to have an executive pastor, the senior pastor or lead pastor wants to attend, he's more than welcome, or a bookkeeper or church manager is also welcome to come to that conference. It'll be great. It's the third week in May, and it'll be a 2-day conference. I believe it's the 24th and 25th, but check on our website to get the specific dates.
Very good. And thank you, Dirk, for coming on and explaining CDF Capital. That sounds like an investment firm, but it's really focused on discipleship and church growth and maturity. You've done a great job. And again, I encourage you to reach out to CDF Capital to learn more and start a conversation. And even if you wouldn't need the financial investment component, they have a lot of resources there to help grow your church, mature your church, and come alongside and help in the church growth. So, Dirk, thank you for joining the Unconventional Ministry podcast.
Thank you, Dennis, for the invitation. Enjoyed our time together.
In our changing world, there are more ways than ever to do ministry. Sat7 as a broadcast media ministry is changing how ministry is done. Through innovative approaches, collaborative efforts, broadcast satellite television, web streaming, and social media, Sat7 is making a difference. Visit Sat7 online today at sat7usa.org to learn ways you can be a part of this kingdom work. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please share it with your friends. If you know of an unconventional ministry approach, please introduce us. We'd like to have them on as guests. Thank you again for joining this episode of the Unconventional Ministry Podcast.